What is going on, y'all? Gamers Goon here today, and we are coming off one of the most insane weekends when it came to college football. Big upsets left, right, and center. Alabama, the number 1 team in the country, they go down. Tennessee, the number 4 team in the country, they go down. Louisville, a top 25 team, they go down. I mean, it was just a fun weekend. It was a fun weekend. Missouri, top 10, gets beat by A&M. Georgia, they did their thing, though. Who else had a letdown? Michigan, a top 10 team, they went down. Miami, once again, very controversial game, ends up getting out of it. But big weekend in college football last week, and that was a rough day, man. That was a rough day. As you can see a little bit by the room, if you've watched the videos before, it is rearranged a little bit here and there. Moved some stuff out, and then moved my room from downstairs to upstairs. So now this is just my full-time dwelling, right? But I was doing that on Saturday. Could not watch most of the games. Got to watch the end of that Alabama-Vanderbilt game, and that was cool. That was cool seeing the field rush, seeing everything that happened coming out of that game. But Saturday, if you guys were busy, if you were out and about, thought maybe if we're going to miss a week of college football, it's this week, not a bunch of great games, you missed out, because this week was the week for college football. It was a very fun week for college football. But getting into this week, and now I am getting into this. I'm going to upload this video Monday night before Monday Night Football for college or for the NFL, and that's simply because tomorrow there is a Tuesday game. We're not talking about the Tuesday game, but we're going to push out the content as much as possible prior to the week starting with college football. Now that it's pretty much every day outside of the NFL days. We have football for like the next 40 days or something ridiculous like that, so it's going to be really fun. So we're gonna try to keep up at least with the content portion of things. We got a 5-point favorite, Louisiana Tech, on Thursday, though, going up against Middle Tennessee. Obviously, I will be watching Thursday Night Football, so I will not be tuned into any of these games on Thursday. But neither team's very spectacular. The only reason we're talking about it is because it's under a touchdown spread. And Middle Tennessee, Louisiana Tech. Louisiana Tech coming off of a loss to FIU, Florida International, who actually play tomorrow. And then Middle Tennessee coming off of a loss to Memphis. So both of these teams, real hit or miss. Louisiana Tech's the favorite. I think I'm going to ride with them for the time being. Next, we get Memphis versus South Florida. South Florida, team that we thought maybe could have pulled that upset off against Miami. Did not look good whatsoever. Followed it up with a very bad loss to Tulane. Only victory this season is Southern Miss. Actually, they do have a Bethune-Cookman victory, but they lost to Alabama. The teams they're losing to are clearly better than them. Memphis, when you look at them, obviously, with that win over Florida State, the only loss coming up against Navy, and these service schools, we need to start talking about them getting ranked. Because the service schools, they've been impressive this year, to me at least. Memphis, though, they are going to beat South Florida. It's going to be bigger than a touchdown spread. The touchdown spread's not enough for this game. I expect Memphis to win this game pretty easily, maybe something like 31-14. So, give me Memphis. Give me Memphis. We obviously can't really talk about UNLV because they're not ranked and it's not a touchdown spread, so we're going to pass up on them versus Utah State. But Utah versus Arizona State, this is actually within the spread margin. It is a top 25 Utah coming off of a loss to Arizona. Arizona State coming off of a close victory against Kansas, and Kansas just keeps doing this, man. They just keep doing this. They won their first game, and then they lost by less than a touchdown to Illinois. They lost by a field goal to UNLV. Less than a touchdown to West Virginia. 11 points to TCU, not great. And then Arizona State, less than a touchdown. So Kansas playing these close games, just not getting on the right side of things. But this obviously ain't about Kansas in this turn. In this one, this was more so just to say Arizona State. They are 4-1, yes, but you look at their schedule. They lost to Texas Tech. Okay, Texas State they beat. 3-2 Texas State. Could have been a non-Power 4 conference to make it into the playoffs. I don't think they will. Mississippi State they beat, but Mississippi State hasn't been particularly great. Wyoming hasn't been particularly great. Utah, coming off of a loss to Arizona, a very big letdown game. I do expect Utah to come in and win this game and clear that 6-point spread. So we're going to be riding with the Utes this week in that game. Now, Saturday, I will be at a game. I will actually be at a game, and it's first on the list here. And Illinois coming in 19.5-point favorites against Purdue. Ryan Walters' old team. Well, I guess it's not Ryan Walters' old team. Ryan Walters' current team going up against his old team. Ryan Walters used to be the defensive coordinator for the Illini. Now he is coming in against them at Memorial Stadium this weekend. 2:30 kickoff. Should be a fun one. This is a rivalry game, so the 19.5 I don't think is going to cut it. I don't think it's going to act. I think Illinois will win, but I think it's going to be a lot closer than that 19.5 simply because rivalry. Purdue's going to want to come and play. Purdue's still got the talent on their team. They just haven't been good this year. Illinois, on the other hand, coming off of a bye, should be okay, but you might see a little bit of, not necessarily lapses, but kicking it back into gear. Maybe the first drive we don't go out and score a touchdown like we've been doing. I mean, the first drive against Penn State looked really good, and the rest of the game didn't. Maybe we have a slower start to this game coming out of a bye, but Illinois should win the game. I'd be shocked if they didn't. Illinois, I don't think they're going to clear the 19.5 against Purdue, but I think it should be a fun little game. I think it could be something along the lines. I think it's going to be lower scoring, to be honest with you. I could see it being like a 24-21 type of game. I expect it to be a close, grinded-out kind of game, honestly. Next, we get North Texas, and we get to talk about them this week, but I don't get to watch them yet again. Florida Atlantic, if you've heard me talk this year about Florida Atlantic, I think they're terrible. Their quarterback has not been good, in my opinion. I haven't watched them play very much, but the few times I have gotten to see Florida Atlantic play, they have not impressed me. The QB has not looked good. North Texas, I haven't got to watch them, but I follow the Mean Green. And North Texas has actually done pretty solid this year, 4-1. I think they could be, not necessarily going to, right? But they could be an outside chance right now. They're sitting 5th in the AAC. They could have an outside chance at the playoffs if you win out. North Texas, I think they beat FAU. And I'm going to hold the game of the week. I'm going to hold the one the game day is at until last, probably. But we get Georgia Tech, North Carolina, 11 a.m. kickoff. 6-point favorites for Georgia Tech. North Carolina hasn't been particularly good. They're 3-3, but Georgia Tech is 4-2. So, I mean, is there much of a difference there? Georgia Tech coming off of a good win against Duke. Duke, a team that we thought maybe could end up winning there in the ACC. North Carolina, Georgia Tech. Should be a fun little game. I think it's going to be close. 6-point spread, probably not. I think it's going to be closer than that. Probably a 3-point game there. But I'm going to ride with Georgia Tech. In that one. Wisconsin versus Rutgers. Rutgers coming off of a loss 14-7 against Nebraska. Really tough, grinded out kind of game. Wisconsin blew out Purdue. But Rutgers are coming into this game 2.5-point favorites. I don't buy it. One bit. I think Wisconsin wins this game by about a touchdown, maybe more. I'm riding with Wisconsin in that game. I don't really feel like Rutgers versus Wisconsin is a great matchup for Rutgers. I know they've been good. I know that they played close against a Nebraska team that we think could be top 25. I don't think that they're going to win against Wisconsin, though. Missouri versus UMass. Missouri has to have a bounce-back week. They had a very poor performance last week against A&M. A&M won that game 41-10. Missouri, easier game. They're playing UMass. Should be pretty easy. They're going to win that game, win it big. 27.5 is the spread. I expect them to cover. Bama opening up as 21-point favorites against South Carolina. Now, that's a little disrespectful. Team that just lost to Vanderbilt. South Carolina, who's been an okay. They're 3-2. They're not great, but they have been okay. They played close against LSU. They beat a Kentucky team that can always give up a fight. Then they didn't look that good against Ole Miss at all, 27-3. Now, obviously, Alabama is a better team than Ole Miss if you were to ask me. But I expect South Carolina to probably keep it within that 21-point range. I don't think it's going to be a blowout. I think Alabama, obviously they're going to come for revenge from last week, but I do expect this to be something like a 35-21 type of game. I don't think that South Carolina is going to allow it to get that far out of hand. Clemson versus Wake Forest. Clemson opening up as a 20-point favorite. Wake Forest coming off of a victory against NC State, who's really let us down this year. Clemson coming off of a victory over Florida State, team that hasn't been very good at all this season. Now, Clemson is opening this game as 20-point favorites. I do expect them to win. I think they could cover that, so I'm going to ride with Clemson to cover the 20.5. Or, well, just 20-point favorites. My apologies. Washington versus Iowa. Iowa the favorites in this game. I know you might be looking at me and being like, well, Washington just got a very big win against Michigan. I don't think Michigan is better than Iowa. That might be a cold take. I don't think Michigan is better than Iowa. Now, Iowa, early on, they were able to stick with Ohio State. At halftime, it was 7-0. But Iowa's offense is a problem. They are a problem. Their defense is going to make these games against teams that aren't Ohio State and aren't Georgia and aren't Penn State or some of those top 10, top 25 teams, right? Iowa's going to be able to hang around with a Washington. They're going to be able to hang around with a Washington. Now, Washington, do they have you don't really have to have very great defense to beat Iowa. But what you do need is some decent offense to beat Iowa. Now, say Iowa scores 7 points in this game. You got to score 10. And if you're making me guess which is more likely, Iowa to hold Washington scoreless or Iowa to put up enough points to beat maybe a 14-point performance from Washington, I'm riding with Washington in that game. 2.5-point favorites for Iowa. I don't agree. I'm riding with Washington to cover the spread and win the game. Next, we got Ball State versus Kent State. Both teams not very good. Out of the 10 games they've played together, they have a total of 1 win. Now, their 1 win is against Missouri State. Ball State almost beat Central Michigan. They almost beat Western Michigan. Kent State, though, you look at them, they have not almost won anything other than St. Francis, PA. St. Francis, PA. Who is St. Francis, PA? I have no idea. Ball State's going to win the game, 6.5-point favorites. I think they do that pretty easily. Ball State has been hanging around with some teams that are probably a tier or two above of them. So I think Ball State could probably win this game pretty comfortably and cover the 6.5. Miami, Ohio, going up against Eastern Michigan. Now, this is 2 teams completely different, actually. Miami, Ohio, actually the favorites in this game by 3 points. Miami, Ohio, with 4 losses, 1 win. Their 1 win against UMass. Did not do well against Notre Dame. Played somewhat close against Cincinnati. Played close against Northwestern. Lost to a Toledo team that hasn't been particularly special. Then you look at this Eastern Michigan team. Beat that St. Francis team that we were just talking about. Beat Kent State. Beat Jacksonville State. Lost pretty badly to Washington, not going to lie. And then they beat UMass. So, this is going to be a decent little game. But I'm riding with the 4-1 team. Against the spread, Eastern Michigan's going to win. Cincinnati versus UCF. Cincinnati 3-2, UCF 3-2. Little decent game there. Texas Tech beating Cincinnati by 3 last time out. UCF losing by 11 to Florida. Both teams very middle of the pack. Teams that could have a good day. I'm going to ride with the home team, UCF 3. I'm going to say they cover the 3. I'm going to ride with the home team there. Old Dominion versus Georgia State. Old Dominion's giving me some problems this year. Played close against Coastal Carolina. beat Bowling Green, who's played close against Penn State. Didn't do particularly great against Virginia Tech. Looked decent against Eastern Carolina, who's an average team. Looked decent against South Carolina, who's an average team. Georgia State, 2-2, coming off of a 17-point loss to Georgia Southern. They beat that Vandy team that just beat Bama. This could be a decent little game. I'm going to ride with Georgia State. Why not? We'll ride with Georgia State to get the job done. 1.5-point favorites, we'll ride with it. San Jose State versus Colorado State. San Jose State actually a 1-point favorite in this game, coming off of a victory against Nevada. Colorado State losing in terrible fashion to Oregon State. Colorado State should have won the game, in my opinion. Just poor play there at the end of the game for them. Colorado State, though, they need a bounce-back week. A lot of hype was around that Colorado State team early in the season, and they've fallen flat. It's time to show people why there was some hype around that team. Fowler Nicolosi, Torrey Horton, let's see what you're capable of. I'm riding with Colorado State this week. Penn State versus USC. USC actually was one of those teams that lost. They lost to Minnesota. I did not mention that earlier. They lost to Minnesota. Penn State, coming off of a decent win against UCLA. If you look at Penn State, I think they can get to that Ohio State game unscathed. USC doesn't particularly scare me because they haven't been great. Minnesota beat them. Michigan, who we don't think is that good, beat them. Penn State should win this game pretty easily, but it could be one of those games because USC does have the talent to match. It could be one of those trick games where you let them hang around for a little while, and we're deep into the fourth quarter talking about is Penn State on upset watch. I'm riding with Penn State at 5.5. I think they cover, but this could be one of those tricky games for Penn State if they're not ready against USC. California versus Pittsburgh. California got scammed out of a win. 2 weeks ago, there was enough evidence on a ball that you didn't even see. A ball that wasn't even seen by anybody because it was between like three guys. They called a touchdown on the field, and they overturned the ruling on the field because somebody's out of bounds touching the ball. Here's my question. There's enough evidence on that where you don't know who really has possession. There's enough evidence on that. But on a replay that you go to the booth with, you didn't throw a flag. They called into the booth to look at targeting. And they didn't call it after the fact. They said it stood. There was not enough evidence on a targeting call that was blatant that the rules analyst said the letter of the law is that is a targeting. It is textbook targeting. 2 weeks ago, there was not enough evidence to overturn it. What does the ACC do both weeks? Whatever the correct decision was, according to the rules analyst, the guy that has no skin in the game, the ACC sides with Miami. Because the ACC has to protect Miami. Now, California, that does have everything to do with them this week, actually. Miami is a different story when we get to them. But California specifically is going to come into this game. I don't care if it's a 22-ranked Pittsburgh. California is going to come in this game feeling short-sighted. They are going to feel like they should have won last week. They were going to be a ranked team, and the refs ripped it underneath them. They helped Cam Ward win that game. They helped Miami win that game to push the ACC narrative. At the end of the day, California should feel like they should have won that game because they should have. But instead, the ACC sided with Miami, and you got a Cam Ward game-winning touchdown drive to help support his Heisman candidacy. Pittsburgh, I'm sorry, you're running into a California team that has a lot to be upset about. And they're a capable team. This team we saw last week against Miami, they're a team that can hang. California, 3-point underdogs. They're coming into this game. They're going to win big. I think that Pittsburgh is just going to get shell-shocked with what California's going to do. I could see this game being a 2-touchdown game win for California. I know Pittsburgh is a 3-point favorite. I don't care. I'm riding with California. Texas versus Oklahoma. Red River Showdown. The Red River Showdown. Oklahoma 4-1. Texas 5-0. Texas back to number 1 in the AP poll. And Oklahoma's only loss came against Tennessee. Tennessee, I get they lost. Not a bad team. I think that's still a team that is a playoff team. I think they're still well off when it comes to making the college football playoffs. So, Oklahoma, instead of talking about their down part, let's talk about them beating Auburn. Pretty good win. Beating Tulane, who is a tough team. Houston, not a tough team. Temple. Oklahoma hasn't really been tested outside of one game, and they lost. Then you look at Texas. Haven't really had a test all year. Colorado State hasn't been good. Michigan, I don't think should even be top 25 still, even though they are. UTSA, not the best. Louisiana Monroe, not the best. Mississippi State hasn't been doing very well this year. Oklahoma is the first real test for Texas. And this is one of those games that you're going to be in. It doesn't matter that there's a 14.5 point spread for Texas. This is one of those games you're going to be in it late. It's a rivalry game. The emotions are going to be there. Oklahoma is going to want to play. Texas is going to be in it. This is going to be a chippy game. This is going to be a game where tempers are going to flare. This is going to be a high emotion type game. And at the end of the day, I do believe Texas is going to win this game, but I don't think 14.5 is the line. That is completely disrespectful to Oklahoma. I know they haven't been particularly great, but Texas hasn't been particularly tested at this point either. I think this could be a game where you're looking at maybe a 34-27 type game. So, Oklahoma, I think they can make it interesting. Will be interesting to see. Will we have 2 weeks in a row where a number 1 team in the country goes down? Will we have a new number 1 next week after the big showdown over there in Eugene, Oregon with College Football Game Day? We'll find out when it comes to college football later this weekend. But I do think Texas wins. Don't have to talk about the Louisville game. They're not ranked, and it's 7.5. Northern Illinois versus Bowling Green. Northern Illinois, ranked at one point, hasn't been good since. 3-2. Lost to NC State, who hasn't been good. Lost to Buffalo. Bowling Green had that game against Penn State, but they're 2-3. They're 2-3. They didn't beat Penn State. That's not what I was saying. But they played close. Played close against A&M. The only team that they lost to that I think they're probably better than is Ole Miss. Or, not Ole Miss. If they're better than Ole Miss, we're in trouble. Old Dominion. Bowling Green, though, I think they're a solid little team. They could beat Northern Illinois. I'm going to ride with them to beat Northern Illinois. 2.5 point favorites. Bowling Green gets the job done in a close game, like a 23-20 type situation. Notre Dame opening up as 23.5 point favorites against Stanford. Really, really questionable there. Now, Virginia Tech did handle Stanford. Clemson did handle Stanford. But are we viewing this Notre Dame team as Clemson caliber? I don't know. I don't know just yet. Syracuse, Stanford beat Syracuse. They beat Cal Poly. Played within a touchdown to TCU. Notre Dame, after the NIU game, the Northern Illinois game, blew out Purdue. Blew out Miami 28-3. Played close against a Louisville team. I think Stanford's going to keep it somewhat close. 23.5 is a very big margin for a Notre Dame team that fell to NIU and a Stanford team that has had some decent games. I'm going to ride with Notre Dame to win, not cover. San Diego State versus Wyoming. Decent little game there. 2-3 San Diego State going up against 1-4 Wyoming. Wyoming coming off a win against Air Force, beating a service school. The service schools, man, they're winning games, but we're dropping one to Wyoming? Come on, Air Force. No, but I mean Army and Navy. Those two are really hitting their stride right now, in my opinion. You look at San Diego State though; they did not look good against California or Oregon State. They lost to Central Michigan. They did beat Hawaii, who's not good. Texas A&M Commerce they beat. Hasn't had much of a test. Wyoming beat Air Force. Played BYU. lost by 20 to them. Idaho, who played Oregon tough, they played pretty tough. Did not look good against Arizona State. It's a true jump ball in this game. You can flip a coin. I'm gonna ride with the home team, Wyoming. It's a 1-point spread to San Diego State, but I'm gonna ride with the home team to get the job done. Ohio versus Central Michigan. These games, 3-point favorites to Ohio. Central Michigan, 3-2. Ohio 3-2. Ohio, let's see what they've done. Haven't been particularly good. They've beat some teams that aren't great. Central Michigan had that Illinois loss. Ball State, San Diego State, Sensei. I'm going to ride with Central Michigan to win. I'm going to ride with Central Michigan to win that game. And obviously they're going to cover the spread if they win the game because they're underdogs. BYU versus Arizona. Another little trap game here. Arizona capable of, last week they showed us they're capable of knocking off a top team. Texas Tech, they lost to, or not last week, 2 weeks ago with Utah. They showed us they can beat some decent teams. BYU though, beat Baylor. They beat Kansas State. They beat SMU, who I think is really solid. BYU's legit, man. BYU is legit. And Arizona, this could be a game. I think this is going to be a game very similar to that Kansas State game. I thought they stood a chance against Kansas State. They didn't. 24-point loss. BYU, very similar in my opinion. BYU should get the job done. I'm riding with BYU. 4-point spread. I'm going to take BYU to cover that spread even. I am really believing in this BYU team. I think they could be very solid, and I think they will be a college football playoff team. Georgia versus Mississippi State. Don't really need to talk about it. 32-point favorites for Georgia. Georgia will cover. Mississippi State has not been good. It's unfortunate, but Georgia will win. Just right on the edge here of a touchdown spread. Louisiana Monroe versus Southern Miss. We're talking about it because it's at 7. I'm riding with Louisiana Monroe because they are 7-point favorites, but why did we have to talk about that game? I don't have any skin in the game there. Washington State versus Fresno State. Washington State opening up as 3-point favorites against Fresno State. Fresno State 3-2. Got blown out by UNLV, who, by the way, don't have their QB anymore. Washington State should win this game. They should win this game. I know it looked bad against Ashton Genty and Boise State, but it doesn't matter. Everybody looks bad against Ashton Genty and Boise State right now. Best running back in the country at the moment. Probably the Heisman at the moment too. And if he keeps up the pace he's at right now, he's gonna hit 200 or 2,000 yards pretty easily. 5 games into the year, he's already over 1,000, averaging about 200 yards per game. That guy's scary good. So Washington State's going to win. They just ran into a tough match last week. New Mexico versus Air Force. New Mexico 1-4. Air Force 1-4. New Mexico getting the job done against New Mexico State. High-scoring affair. And then Navy blew out Air Force. But New Mexico, I got them as the winners. 6.5-point favorites. I don't know if they're going to cover that. Haven't been particularly impressive to me. Neither has the Air Force, though, to be honest. So, who knows? New Mexico, I got as winners, though. UTSA versus Rice. UTSA 2-3, Rice 1-4. UTSA looked half decent. Only lost by 10 to Eastern Carolina. Rice lost a close one to Charlotte. It's a coin flip. UTSA's favorites. I'll go with them. 6.5-point favorites. I don't think they'll cover though. Florida versus Tennessee. Tennessee coming off that loss that we were talking about. Florida. They won by 9 against UCF, but Tennessee gonna beat the brakes off of Florida. 15.5-point favorites. I think they'll cover. Tennessee wins this game like 42-10 or something ridiculous. I think this is gonna really be a revenge game for Tennessee. Oregon State versus Nevada. Nevada 2-4. Oregon State 4-1. Oregon State hasn't been particularly great, but they've gotten the job done so far. Only game they didn't was Oregon. Tough game to run into, though, to be fair. Nevada, similar to Colorado State. I'm going to ride with Oregon State to win, but I think it's a very similar game. It's going to be played pretty close. Ole Miss versus LSU. Now, this is going to be where I differ. Ole Miss is 3-point favorites, but I'm riding with LSU. I'm riding with the Tigers. I fully believe in it. I fully believe in what I'm saying right now because Ole Miss, they played South Carolina. They beat them pretty good. But Ole Miss had that Kentucky game that made it questionable. Ole Miss really hasn't been tested all that much. If you look at their schedule, you have the Kentucky game, South Carolina, a Wake Forest team that's not good, Georgia Southern, who's not good, Middle Tennessee, who's not good, and Furman. LSU, though, you look at their schedule, they lost to a USC team that we don't think's that good, but they beat South Carolina. They beat UCLA, who's, I mean, they're not great, but they can put up a test. And South Alabama, a team that I thought was going to be decent. They're not that decent, but I thought they were going to be decent. So I'm going to ride with LSU. I just got a gut feeling about them. 4-1 LSU against 5-1 Ole Miss. Big game. Whoever wins this game is going to probably, as long as they win out, be a lock for the college football playoffs. If you lose this game, I think you're pretty much out. I'm riding with LSU to get the job done here, though. Vandy versus Kentucky. Kentucky opens up as 14-point favorites. I don't like it as 14-point favorites, but I do think Vandy is in for a crash here in this game. Coming off of a big win against Alabama, a team like Kentucky, who is a tough team, who can compete with a lot of different teams, played Georgia close. Kentucky's defense is pretty solid. I don't think that Kentucky goes out and puts up enough points to win by 14, but I do think this is a game where Kentucky is going to win. Kentucky's defense really solid. Offense, really hit or miss. I don't think Vanderbilt is going to lose by 14 in that game, though. I'm only talking about it because it's Vandy. It ain't a touchdown spread, but it's Vandy. Vandy just beat the number one team, so we got to talk about Vandy. Iowa State versus West Virginia. Iowa State opening up as 3-point favorites. West Virginia, 3-2. Had a good game last week, beating Oklahoma State, who we thought was going to be pretty solid this year. They've fallen off a cliff pretty quickly. Iowa State's going to win this game. Undefeated team. Iowa State they're going to win this game. 3-point favorites. I like them at 3. So there we go. Marshall versus Georgia Southern. 2.5-point favorites for Marshall. I've been singing Marshall's praises lately. They beat App State. I told you they'd beat App State. They did beat App State. Georgia Southern got the job done against Georgia State, who, like we said, beat that Vandy team. But I'm going to ride with Marshall. I'm really liking what they're doing right now. Syracuse versus NC State. Syracuse is going to win. 4.5-point favorites. I think they cover that. NC State has not looked good at all this season. Minnesota versus UCLA. Another team that could be on a crash moment, but I do think Minnesota wins the game. 5.5-point favorites against UCLA. UCLA hasn't been particularly great. I think Minnesota wins another close game. Kansas State versus Colorado. 4.5-point favorites for Kansas State. Kansas State. They seem to get the job done, except the one time I picked them, right? I picked them against BYU. They didn't get the job done. I didn't pick them against Oklahoma State. They get the job done. I didn't pick them against Arizona. They get the job done. Kansas State, they're going to make me regret this. I'm going with Colorado. I am going with Colorado to win this game. 4.5-point favorites. Colorado, I think, are a team that can hang around. They're 4-1. Coming off a big win against UCF, who they were also underdogs against. I got them beating Kansas State. It's at home. Boise State versus Hawaii. Boise State, I don't think I'm going to have Boise State lose a game all this season. They had their one loss against Oregon. Ashton Jeanty is a different beast. 21-point favorites. I think they cover that. I think Ashton Jeanty alone gets 21, or is responsible for 21 points, because I think he does score 3 touchdowns. But then we get to the game of the week. Ohio State, Oregon. Buckeyes, Ducks. Last time this happened, I had my butt in a seat in Columbus, Ohio, and I watched my Oregon Ducks win. I watched them win. I watched my Oregon Ducks beat Ohio State. And Ohio State, I know Ohio State's just not going to sit around and allow that to linger, right? They're not gonna forget about it. Some of those guys are still on that team. I'm not sure who, but it was less than 4 years ago, so surely some of those guys are still on that team. Olave, I believe, was on that team. Garrett Wilson, JSN, CJ Stroud was the QB back then. It's a good Ohio State team we beat. It was a good Ohio State team that we beat. C.J. Verdell had a good game. I mean, that just was pure cinema. It was cinema. And it's going to be all the same in Eugene, Oregon this weekend. College football game day is on campus. I'm no longer in Oregon, so I'm not going to get to see that. But I'm going to be tuned in. College football game day is on campus. Last time it happened, they blew out UCLA. UCLA was doing pretty good. They didn't do very good afterwards. Oregon made them pay. You don't come to Eugene and beat Oregon on college football game day. It's not going to happen. Ohio State, you're a little bit better than UCLA. It's going to be a good game. Is this Ohio State team capable of walking into Eugene and winning? Absolutely. Absolutely. But in my opinion, this game comes down to one man and one man only. It doesn't come down to anybody on Ohio State. Ohio State, we know what they're going to do. They're going to come in, they're going to score 42 points. Can Oregon keep up? Oregon, I think their defense has been pretty solid, but if you're an Oregon fan, this week is not the week to expect them to hold a team to like 25 or like under 28 points. It's not going to happen. It could happen, but don't expect it. Don't expect it. If you're an Oregon fan, don't expect Jordan James to go for another 160 yards. I would love for it to happen. I think Jordan James has a solid game in this game. I don't know if it's going to be as great as last week. I think the run game will be there. I think the offensive line play will be there. I think the defense will be there. We kind of know what we're getting out of all those groups, though. There's one man in particular that if he answers questions against Ohio State this weekend, not only would help Oregon win in this game, but inserts his name into the Heisman candidacy. He automatically, if he beats Ohio State this weekend, becomes a guy that right now I'm not seeing in top 10 Heisman lists. He becomes a guy that is in those lists, and that is Dillon Gabriel. Dillon Gabriel, preseason, everybody thought he could be a Heisman guy. Hasn't really lived up to the billing just yet. Dillon Gabriel hasn't turned the ball over much. Last week, turned it over twice. 3 interceptions on the season. Not bad, but hasn't really taken the world by storm. If Dillon Gabriel walks into Eugene, into Autzen Stadium next Saturday, and he delivers the best game of his career, Oregon is going to walk out as not only the number 2 team in the country, but they very easily could walk out as the best team in the country at number 1. Whoever walks out of this game could be the number 1 team in the country. I know Texas is number 1 right now, but I think that Red River rivalry is going to be a lot closer than people are expecting. And maybe that makes people readjust the way they're thinking. Whoever walks out of this game, almost guaranteed. Almost. Now, there's like a 5% chance that they're not guaranteed, but whoever walks out of this game, I would say, is nearly a lock to make it to the college football playoffs. The loser still has a chance, right? One loss ain't the end of the world in a 12-team playoff format, but they have to win out. Now, say Oregon loses this game to Ohio State, right? You assume they go in and beat Purdue. You assume they go beat Illinois. You assume they probably beat Michigan. They probably beat Maryland. Wisconsin, Washington at the end of the season could get a little tricky. Maybe that Michigan game, maybe that Illinois game. Illinois been pretty solid, like I said. Obviously, I'm going to be at the game this weekend. I think they're a solid team, but are they Oregon? No. Michigan, you're traveling to the big house, could get tricky. I think you're still the favorites in that one. Wisconsin, a capable team, probably still pretty fine there. But Washington, not much success against Washington, if any, under the Dan Lanning era. Has not looked good. And that's because Michael Penix has been torching us the last few years. We were literally in multiple different games against Washington. We were 1 or 2 plays away from being in the national championship last year. If we beat Washington last year, I fully believe we go into the national championship. I think we matched up better against Michigan than Washington did. But it doesn't matter because Washington had the number of Oregon. But if Oregon comes in and loses to an Ohio State this week, things can start to get dicey because you think Purdue and Maryland are pretty much freebies. Illinois, you're probably the favorites, but they've shown some potential this year, so that could be a tricky one. Same thing with Michigan, same thing with Wisconsin, same thing with Washington. So any lapse in the next 6 weeks after this game, that could seal your fate and you're not a playoff team anymore. So this game is huge. You look at Ohio State. If Ohio State, their line of thinking, Nebraska could be a tricky game. Penn State, the number 4 team in the country, is going to be a tricky game. They probably beat Purdue. They probably beat Northwestern. Indiana, I think they probably beat, but Indiana's undefeated, so you don't know really what this Indiana team has because they haven't been tested. In Michigan, they're playing at home, so they do have an advantage there. But these are all tricky games, right? Whoever walks out of this, I think, even if they lose one of these tricky games, are a lock. They're a lock to make it. But if you lose, it starts to get tricky. If you lose, it starts to get tricky. Now, this spread is a 3.5-point favorite towards the Buckeyes. You look at the Buckeyes, they've been pretty dang good. They beat Iowa, tough defense, 35 points scored on them. They beat Michigan State, who, guess what? Oregon just did the same thing. Didn't look as pretty as Ohio State. Ohio State did it 38-7. Oregon was 31-10. But both of these teams, you look at them, and they're just two behemoths of teams. Two completely different looking teams, to be honest with you. In ways that they're different, they're the same. 2 running back sets for Ohio State has been a thing. They have Quinshon Judkins. They have Trevion Henderson. They're pretty solid. But guess what? Oregon has Noah Whittington and Jordan James. Quarterbacks, both transfers. 2 different kind of players, both transfers. Oregon, I think the one advantage you have offensively is that tight end position. Terrence Ferguson, I think, is better than Ohio State's tight ends. Offensive line, solids. You got big secondary transfers on both sides of the ball. Jabbar Muhammad for Oregon and Caleb Downs for Ohio State. So, when you match them up on paper, 2 very similar teams. But I think they're very different in the same aspects. Because you look at Oregon. I don't think they are as interested this season as an Ohio State is. Ohio State goes into the games. They've put up 49 against Marshall. They put up 56 against Western Michigan. I don't think Oregon's that kind of team. I think they're just getting their wins, getting players reps when they get those wins. Now, you ain't going to be getting Justice Lowe a bunch of reps in this game. You aren't going to be getting Jaden Lamar a bunch of reps in this game. You're not going to be getting the younger guys or the guys that haven't really had an opportunity many reps in this game. That's just Ohio State for you. But at the end of the day, you're playing them at home in front of a sold-out Autzen crowd. $300+, $400+ tickets, $500+ tickets. Sold out. Biggest game in Eugene history. Give me Oregon. Oregon is going to win this game. They are going to beat Ohio State. And Oregon is going to be the team at the Big Ten level that when you're talking about who is that team, you're going to be thinking of this O. Not the Ohio State. No, you're going to be thinking about this O. With that being said, thank you all for watching. I will see you all next week for college football. We will have Thursday night football. For the NFL, we will have a video out on Thursday, before Thursday night football. You're going to be seeing this Tuesday. I'm recording this on Monday. So, anyways, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.